Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program from the Huffington Post, Sam Stein, not to be confused with Sam Seder. Welcome to the program, Sam.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I can't tell you how often I get, oh my God, it's a real pleasure to meet you. You're Sam Stein.
And I get it just the opposite. They always think I'm funnier because they assume I'm Sam Seder.
You don't really, do you get that? Because
no, it's never happened.
It's bizarre to me. Like literally, my downstairs neighbor was like, have I ever seen you on TV? Yeah, maybe on MSNBC. You're Sam Stein. No, I'm not. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So that's fine. I appreciate getting the credit for a lot of the work you're doing.
I was going to say I want rights.
Keep up the good work, because it really does. It really does help me. All right, now I appreciate you're taking the time, Sam. I know that you're stuck now in in some type of elevator shaft somewhere in the bowels of the Huffington Post. But I want to talk about the work you've been doing, and particularly this latest piece. But the work that you have been doing in tracking the implications of the sequester, which is long gone now from the front pages and the cable talk shows, because I think there's a sense out there that the sequester was sort of the mouse that didn't, or the lion that didn't roar. There's some type of metaphor there, but in fact, this is causing real pain across the country as we speak.
Yeah, well, I think the metaphor is the dog that didn't bark or bite. And yeah, you're right. There's conventional wisdom taking hold right now in D.C. that says sequestration was this oversold bag of, cuts, and that they actually haven't really impacted anybody. And there's a really different story if you talk to anyone on the receiving end of the cuts, predominantly outside D.C., but a lot of people in D.C. too. And, their lives have been completely upended by this. And so what we've tried to do is just sort of trace the impacts of policy decisions in Washington to where they matter the most. And, we've done it with a number of things. The most recent one was looking at what's happening with parents and families who have kids in the Head Start program and what it means for them. And, across the country, kids are being denied access to Head Start where they previously had it. And that means that parents are being forced to figure out, how they're going to take care of their kids during the day, whether they're going to have to spring for daycare. In some cases, how they're going to spring for the 2 hot meals a day that their kids are getting at the Head Start program. And for low-income families, it's not easy. It's, it could be somewhere between, $500 to $700 a month that you have to take out of your pocket for daycare that you previously didn't have. And so, there are real-world implications to sequestration, and not a lot of people understand them or are exploring them.
And specifically when we talk about Head Start, I mean, this is a statistic that I cite quite often on this program, but a child of a low income family enters into kindergarten with a listening vocabulary of 20,000 less words than that of a child of upper income. 20,000 less words, and Head Start is at least mitigates that to some degree, where you're giving kids a chance to enter into school on an equal footing, or at least a relatively equal footing. And so the implications here are not just in terms of what it does to the lives of these families at the time, but you're also handicapping children significantly as they go through their school years.
That's absolutely right. I mean, one of the underlying goal of Head Start is essentially to put disadvantaged kids on as much of an even footing as they can entering kindergarten. I mean, that's the idea behind Head Start. You use federal resources to get these kids the sort of advantages that middle-income, upper-income kids have, and it has long-term help and ramifications for these children and the families. And so whether it's reading comprehension or writing skills, those are very important. But, Head Start goes so far beyond educational services, too. In Vermont, this is part of the story, in Vermont they have what they call a tooth tutor program, which is basically trying to teach kids and their families about dental hygiene. And I interviewed a mother whose older child hadn't gone through the Vermont Head Start and had all types of tooth problems when she was young, and they cost the family, a lot, and they cost the kid a lot of pain, obviously, because who likes going to the dentist repeatedly? Her younger daughter was put through the Head Start program, did the tooth tutor program. She's been perfectly fine. She has great dental hygiene, and it might seem like a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but having that type of, professional guidance with respect to dentistry is something that low-income families just never even contemplate or think about because they have so many other things on their ledger. That's what Head Start provides to these kids. And, it just gives them a decent shot or a better shot at succeeding later in life because these are formative years for them.
And so do we have a sense, is it possible? One of the things that obviously you guys are doing over there at the Huffington Post, and I should say that there's a number that you have where people can call in with their stories about dealing with different aspects of the sequester. The number's 860-348-3376. There's an email address, too. We'll put both those on the blog at majority.fm. But is there any way to get, a definitive number of what the implications are? Because this is, one of the things that I've noticed about the sequester is that anything that was sort of had national implications or at least affected people who had access to the national media or to Washington. And I'm thinking specifically about the FAA cuts, but I know there are others, got the attention. But the stuff that is sort of localized, it's just not getting it's just not becoming a national narrative.
Well, sure. A lot of people in my profession and a lot of people who work for Congress don't have their kids in Head Start, and that's one of the reasons why not that much attention has been on it. But I think there's sort of a more pernicious explanation for what's going on here, which is that a lot of these cuts are happening in the abstract. It's what won't get done. So, Head Start, for example, has shifted a lot of the cuts that they're going to make to the incoming class of students. So next year, local Head Start might, for instance, offer 100 fewer slots. That's not affecting anyone right now except for the teachers who get fired. But it is affecting the future generation of parents. And the economic ramifications of sequestration are going to be felt down the road as well. So yesterday, Amanda Turkle and I, my colleague Amanda Turkle and I, did a protest jog with we were reporting on a protest jog of Department of Defense civilian employees who were beginning their furlough days, and we talked to a bunch of them about what they were going to do, how they're going to change their lifestyle habits because they're getting furloughed now 11 days until the end of September. And one of the guys said to me, he goes, well, I called up Comcast on my first furlough day because I wanted to get my Comcast bill reduced. And so I thought about it. I said, well, there's 650 Department of Defense civilian employees who are going to get furloughed. If 10% of them did the same thing, just called up Comcast to figure out how to reduce their bill, and if on average they reduced their bill by $20, what would that mean? And that's a $1.3 million hit for a company like Comcast. Now, that might be nothing for Comcast, but the economic ripple effects of it do go a long way. And so that's the thing about sequestration. Part of the reason there isn't this political pressure to get it done or repealed or replaced is because so much of it is just going to snowball. And eventually down the road we're going to have we're going to realize what we want. But right now I don't think there's a lot of political pressure to change course.
We've talked about Head Start. There are other programs that have really been hit by this. Meals on Wheels comes to mind as well. Tell us what you know about that and other areas that we haven't heard much about in terms of where people are feeling the pain.
Okay, so the main places right now that are feeling the pain are the social safety net programs like Head Start, Meals on Wheels, which is facing cuts across the city, which means essentially fewer hot meals delivered to needy seniors across the country. Public defenders' offices across the country are getting cut. And, what they're doing essentially is they're taking away not the lawyers who staff the public defender's office, but everything around them. So I talked to a bunch of lawyers in public defender's office who are basically handling cases without investigators. And anyone who's been in the law understands that you need an investigation to figure out how to argue your case. So they're basically hampered and hamstrung in that respect. Medical research is taking a huge hit. The National Institute of Health has really cut back on the grants that it's handing to, universities and scientists. And so what we're going to end up seeing is a number of possible advancements in medical technology or science technology are just not going to happen. And I talked to a researcher team out at Temple University who was going to test 3 strands of some sort of medicine that they were developing. Now they're only going to test 2. So you can imagine what's going to happen in that case. And then there's finally the most public thing that's happened that hasn't been fixed yet is Medicare reimbursement to private cancer clinics is being upped. So basically private cancer clinics get reimbursed for the cost of administering Medicare cancer drugs, and they get a administrative reimbursement as well. Those reimbursements are going to be cut. It means basically that fewer patients are going to get cancer treatment when they need it. They're going to have to be deferred to public hospitals. Some of them might have to travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to get the treatment they need. So, yeah, I mean, it's being felt in various different forms across the country, and the only places where we fixed it is with air traffic controllers, so that there's less flight delays, and with meat inspection. We've maneuvered around the furloughs for meat inspectors.
Now, there's 2 aspects to this. One is it's a sort of a classic case of the lack of political punch that basically the poor and lower income people have in this country, and also it seems to me a failure by those who are against the sequestration. I mean, I guess presumably the Democrats on some level, I mean, and the administration to hold the line on things like the meat inspection and the FAA, so that this we could have the so-called shared sacrifice that we hear so much about.
Well, the whole idea behind it was shared sacrifice, right? The bet was that Republicans would find the Department of Defense cuts repugnant, Democrats would find the social safety net cuts repugnant, and therefore they'd have to come to an agreement to replace the thing. But that, of course, didn't work out, in part because, Republicans didn't want to have tax hikes in it, and Democrats did. And so now, the replacement conversation has turned to, well, will there be enough struggling, enough pain being felt across the country that Congress will have to rethink this. And I got to tell you, I mean, if you look at local clips, when members of Congress are back home in their districts, they, commiserate with the people who are suffering. They say, sequestration is a bad thing. We want to replace it. But the national conversation is so far removed. I talked to Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro for this piece on Head Start, and she said, no one's talking about replacing sequestration anymore. It's just not even on our radar. And the people who have the power to, change these cuts that are happening aren't, paying attention. And so I think unless there's some sort of miracle grand bargain deal that happens in the next couple months, and there is a push point for that, which is this debt ceiling and budget negotiations. If they can figure out a way to replace sequestration in those, maybe there is a way out. But outside of that small chance, it looks like this is going to be the policy for some period of time.
Right, and the debt ceiling showdown that'll take place sometime in the early fall, I think, is certainly not the pressure points don't lead towards refunding these programs. It seems to me.
Well, I mean, if I had to make a guess, it wouldn't necessarily be refunding, although it could. It would just be reshuffling. I mean, some of the cuts will happen regardless to some of these programs. I mean, there's certain programs that even in the Obama administration's own budget, they were cutting, stuff like weatherization and, detecting, certain storms and things like that. But, for the more visible programs like a Head Start, that's the saving grace right there is can they figure out a way to restore some of the funds. And, I do think you have seen a number of Republicans concerned about the cuts to NIH grants. You have seen some in their districts talking to Head Start parents, commiserating with them. So it's not like there's no political appetite here. It's just figuring out how to fit all the pieces together.
Now, I know you got to go in a minute or two, but the sequestration story of 2013 seems to be that it's hard to measure these things because of how localized and the constituency that is hurt by these cuts. When we move into 2014, this is going to radically change, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, you're absolutely right about how, it's so localized, it's hard to measure these cuts. But like I said, also, I think the big story is that, a lot of these agencies have tried as best they can to put off the cuts as long as they can. So, for instance, the Department of Defense didn't start furloughing their employees until Monday. And so, they pushed it everything they could as far back into the fiscal year as possible.
And they did that with the assumption, or at least the hope, that Congress would address this in some fashion.
Exactly. But at some point you can't push more. And that's when, the proverbial shit hits the fan. I think I could say shit on radio. And then I think then you're going to start hearing a lot more. Whether that's going to be enough is another case. But this is a slow train wreck that's happening in real time. And we've forgotten about it, I think, nationally for a little bit, but it's taking place. It doesn't take much digging to find these stories, and at some point, those stories are going to resurface, and we're going to start wondering why had we not noticed this when it was taking place.
And the cuts that kick in 2014 are far more severe, aren't they?
Yes, it builds up over time, but the severity of it is simply because it has a snowball effect. So when you, for instance, defund a research project, or you force a research project to cut back, that affects it in year one, obviously, by cutting it back. But that means in year two that you have to do double the investment to get back to where you were at the original baseline, and you're stuck at even reduced funds even then. So just to catch up to where you thought you would be becomes a compounding effect. And so, and it's going to have in 2014, it's going to hurt even more.
But don't the cuts, I mean, like the EPA cuts, the Department of Labor cuts, aren't they just on paper more severe than they were this year? And part of that also because you're dealing with a full fiscal year as opposed to two-thirds of the fiscal year?
Yes, so we had an $85 million cut in this fiscal year. It's going to be bigger than that, obviously, to get to the $1 billion over 10 years, roughly, for the size of sequestration. Top on that, the fact that everyone's trying to backload these cuts, then yes, it's going to be worse.
Wow, okay. And I mean, at the end of the day, from a political standpoint, last question, the sequestration, if we're to believe guys like, I think it was Jack Lew, who said this was sort of baked into the DNA, this was a political maneuver to force a grand bargain. Can we say that from a political standpoint, this whole concept of the super committee and then the sequestration as a political concept was a real failure?
Yeah, I don't think there's any other way to judge it. No one wanted this to pass. Everyone agreed to it on the premise that it wouldn't pass, and then it passed. And now everyone's living with the consequences. And it's such a it is a deliberately poorly designed policy. It was supposed to hurt the most vulnerable people in society, and it's doing that. But the fact that Congress couldn't get its act together really says something. And, it's been a total failure.
And right, to be fair, what we have is basically one party in Congress that is fundamentally sort of their agenda seems to be nothing but to gum up the works of government in some fashion. And it was a tremendous underestimation, I think, of that will by the White House and the Democrats. And so now we're living with the consequences.
I think that's right.
Sam Stein, thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks for me.
I want to make something absolutely clear. Sam Seder does not use expletives on the radio. Sam Stein, however, apparently does. So
sorry about that.
No problem. We're going to put a link up with that number and that email. If you have stories, folks, send them on to Sam. Thanks so much for the talk, Sam.